invite the American panelists to come on the stage and have their names. I think they are here on the slides. But I also want to thank the senator for taking time out of her election campaign somewhere in Alaska to send us this message. She has been a strong supporter of the Arctic Circle, a founding member of the organization, and if she gets re-elected, I'm sure she will be an even more prominent force in the global dialogue and cooperation on the Arctic. I also want to thank the Councillor for his presentation of the new policy. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. I don't know whether you have prepared a statement or not, each of you, but I think in the interest of time, I will first invite the audience, if you are ready with your questions. Let's have the lights up. By the way, there are seats here in the front for those who are standing. The protocol requirement of the front seating are now over. So you can grab any seat here in the front you want. So it's become very democratic now. You can move also to the front if you want to. David, you've been here a long time. Okay, we have a question there.
We have a question.
Okay, good.
Hi, thank you very much. I just wanted to ask you, because we heard in a session this morning that your strategy for the Arctic only explored a small percentage of the actual Arctic and did not integrate the real complexity that does exist in the Arctic. So I wanted to ask you, do you have any strategies on how to improve this in your strategy?
So I'm not sure where that question is coming from. The strategy, I encourage you to read it, is certainly not about only the US Arctic, if that's the complaint. It does look out at the circumpolar Arctic. Let me reiterate the first sentence of the strategy. You heard it a moment ago from Derek Chalet. The United States seeks an Arctic that is peaceful, stable, prosperous, and cooperative. You know, we wrote that sentence last year in an early draft before February. And we actually had a fairly serious internal debate about whether to keep it, or perhaps to change it or delete it altogether in light of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And in the end, we chose to keep it as is. We felt like it is the right signal to send. It is the right message. It is the right vision for the Arctic, not just for us, but I hope for everyone, even if it's harder to achieve at the moment than when we first wrote it.
Great. Do we have...
Can I just ask, do you feel like you have then included the complexity and the percentage of the Arctic needed for the strategy to make sense?
Yes, and perhaps by way of further answer, the strategy took a long time to come out, in part because we spent so much time reviewing the strategies of other nations that have come out recently and being inspired by them, and talking and listening to all those in our nation with interests in the Arctic. People in our Congress, people in our state government of Alaska, the Alaskan Natives and all of their communities and organizations, civil society, industry, academia. So yes, I think the answer to your question is we have attempted, I hope successfully, to reflect the broad diversity that the United States brings as an Arctic nation.
Can I, since there is no burning question, okay, I will come to you back in a minute. But this is the first time, Randy, we have a representation of the new Ted Stevens Center, which is, if I'm correct, under the Department of Defense.
Correct.
But established up in Alaska. This is new. This is new in the Arctic family, so to speak, also within the US portfolio of institutions and platforms. Can you summarize for the audience, since this is the first time you are here on this plenary stage in that capacity, what is this all about?
First of all, thank you for that question.
Yeah.
And it's a privilege to join this distinguished panel and all the distinguished participants of this year's Arctic Circle Assembly. The Ted Stevens Center was actually the number 6 of 6 regional centers that are part of the Department of Defense. was enabled by an act of Congress in 2021, and it was actually approved by the Secretary of Defense on the 9th of June last year. We just reached our initial operating capacity this past summer, and we're both a tool of instrument, if you will, of policy and security cooperation. We're joining 6 DoD regional centers across the planet. We're focused, of course, as a tool of policy and security cooperation, seeking to be both innovative and, of course, use the tools of experimentation in research analysis, practitioner-focused education, and, of course, strategic engagement outreach. That means doing workshops, seminars, symposiums, and field programs across the Arctic with our allies and partners, extending from, if you will, the Seward Peninsula in Alaska all the way through to Rovaniemi, Finland. In research analysis, we're trying to be thinking through the aspects of geophysical to geostrategic in addressing the aspects that are, of course, presenting challenges across the Arctic region. Lastly, we're in formation with the new national strategy for the security strategy for the United States, as well as, of course, the national strategy for the Arctic region, specifically focused on pillar number 1, security.
Good. We had a question there. Yes.
Thank you very much for good introductory speeches. My name is Kristín Vala Ragnarsdóttir from the University of Iceland. I'm delighted to hear about the peaceful, prosperous Arctic that you were talking about, but at the same time, emissions globally are going up and the Arctic is melting.
Yes.
So what is the US strategy, which is responsible for much of all historical emissions? What is the US strategy in reducing CO2 and sequestering it into soil and into rocks?
Maxine, you want to take that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you again for the invitation to join this conversation, and this is critically important, so I'm very eager to respond to any questions regarding this. We obviously, in the US, under this administration, take climate change incredibly seriously. It's a crisis, and it is a priority for the administration, a priority for the department, and certainly a priority for our Bureau. In terms of working consistent with the strategy, it's a clear pillar in the strategy as well. And we're looking at both the resilience side of it as well as the emissions reduction side of it as a key part of that environmental effort. And then, of course, preserving Arctic ecosystems, which is going to be a critical part of both emissions reduction and bolstering resilience. So that's really critically important. In the context of the Arctic Council, which again we see as the foremost institution for cooperation, we're hoping to continue that good work and in fact have been able to act on that. Just about a year and a half ago, Secretary Blinken was right here in Reykjavik at the ministerial meeting and pledged $1 million at least for efforts in climate for the Arctic Council's work. And I'm happy to say that the Department of State's been able to transfer that funding over to the Environmental Protection Agency, and we're working on black carbon in particular, and black carbon public health assessments in order to reduce the local emissions of black carbon, which you know has multiple deleterious effects on both public health as well as the environment. So we're looking at a whole host of opportunities in that regard, and we're eager to cooperate on these very issues, and again, ecosystems will be a key part of that.
Okay, do we have, yes, I'm trying always not to take the same people, but okay, since nobody else, if you, yeah.
There's one over there as well.
Well, oh yeah, yes, let me take here, yes.
Góðan daginn, hello, thank you, takk Ólafur. My name is Ragnar from Iceland, journalist. I was a correspondent in Moscow also for some time. You talk about, or other US representative of, it's very necessary to punish and to isolate Russia forever, or well, for these very brutal and ruthless actions and in Ukraine and so on. But is there some, Arctic family of 8 brothers and sisters? What can the future of this Arctic cooperation and as to the official level? So Russia is now the president of that, and there is no action, and which mistake were done in order to allow or to let this terrible situation come up? Is it completely black and white? We good, they bad. What mistake did the West do in order, well, to allow Putin and his generals to act this way? You know, I could have some list of Iraq, you know, as to international laws, but which mistake were done?
Is there a question in there?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Is there a question?
Which may are going to isolate Russia forever, and which mistake were made, you know? And there are many Inuits, Yakutian and Chukchi who would like to, maybe they hate Putin and are dissidents, and they are isolated from the families. How long will this last, and what was the real mistake of the West in order to allow?
Okay, good. I think you got a number of questions there. Okay, does anyone of you want to make a comment on that? David?
I would.
Yeah.
Go first, I'll follow. Your question assumes that there was some mistake on the part of the West.
Right.
I don't agree with that, not now. The Arctic, since the end of the Cold War, has been the scene of very high level of cooperation. And we have managed to build and sustain a rules-based order there. The invasion of Ukraine is a direct threat to that rules-based order. You ask whether the current circumstances of the Arctic will continue forever. I hope not. I hope a day will come when it will be possible once again to speak of the Arctic 8. And indeed, we need to be careful to take steps now that don't foreclose that possibility. But for the moment, it is impossible to cooperate with Russia in the Arctic.
Mike?
I would add that the four pillars that the counselor laid out for the national strategy in the Arctic region is not just for the United States, I don't believe. There's been, I think you could call it, by reflection of this panel, a sort of continuity in U.S. effort. There's continuity between those pillars and the organizations and the agencies we all lead. But there's also that opportunity for continuity among us all, right? We all share a sense of urgency about the North. Fill in your blank which issue you would like to follow up. So like Dave, I don't agree that we did something wrong that then set Russia forward to do what they have done in Ukraine. I do believe it's time to double down on our partnerships. I do believe it's either an opportunity or a necessity that we work together on at least the four pillars we've laid out, but you represent other countries, other organizations, and you have priorities for your nations and for your organizations. I would argue that there are hooks between those four pillars that the United States has put forward and interests of this entire room. I know for the U.S. Arctic Research Commission, we have 5 goals we will send to the President to direct U.S. Arctic research in the coming 2 years. I can do an overlay of those 5 goals to the 4 pillars that sit within the national strategy for the Arctic region, and very much complement and even advance the U.S. national security policy set out yesterday. So I think the effort about what we should do with our time, is it best to look back to see what we did wrong collectively, or is it to try to mitigate what's happening now and address it, but also think about the future Arctic we want to shape? What do those contours look like? And that's where I spend my time thinking about the North.
Yes, there's a question there in the back.
Hello, Fiona Morrison from the Outer Hebrides in Scotland, Chair of Scottish Rural Action, which delivers the Rural Parliament. I haven't read your strategy, so I would have to welcome and say that I believe that your hearts are in the right place around all of this. But my concern is, and it's been further bolstered by in the session I was this morning, we are still looking at how we mitigate climate emergency, which we've heard time and time again, but still pursuing a growth agenda, prosperity, growth, which is GDP-led and still driving a consumerist kind of way of living. Now, I noticed in the sessions I was in this morning that it was the young people, a young Sami lady from Norway and a student from the university here in Iceland. And in both cases, they were saying, but what about degrowth? Shouldn't we be looking at living a different way for the sake of our planet?
Okay.
And I just wondered where you are with that.
Yeah. There was a question also behind you. I think we will take that question before I go back to the panel.
Good afternoon. I'm Gabriela Olmos from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. The Arctic has become a receiving region of migrants of many communities. Anchorage is one of the most diverse cities in the United States with 107 languages spoken at its school district. So my question is, how are these new policies addressing migration to the Arctic? Thank you.
Okay. Who wants to take or comment on these two questions? Mike.
Maxine? Well, perhaps I can start addressing the first question, and thank you for that. It's obvious to me that the way we have been living has to change. You're right. That said, a lot of the economies in the North are still heavily dependent on fossil fuels. We need to change that. In order to change that, we need to offer other sources of economic activity. We need to transition to a greener economy. It's easy to speak of degrowth if you perhaps live in the European Arctic or in Scotland. For people in northern Alaska,
That's right.
they
That's
seek
different.
growth. They seek a better way of life. They seek more infrastructure, more access to education, more things, and we need to find an economy that will provide that for them.
Mike, you want to say something?
I'm going to yield to Maxine.
Well, I'll just say two quick things. One is that I think there is a definite emphasis on circular economy. I just affirm everything that Ambassador Balton said, especially with respect to the fact that we need to change the way that we're living given the circumstances. We have an opportunity, I think, to think about different ways in which we define prosperity and the way in which economies will function in a healthy fashion. I think that's certainly one of our North Stars in thinking about what's next. I'll pivot quickly, just say migration in particular, and I can't speak directly to the Arctic. I'll yield the floor to Mike and Church on that, but we're seeing movement of people throughout the globe, and so this is something in which conversation across many communities and regions will be really critically necessary so that we're both prepared to be host communities and welcome, as well as to allow for the dignity of those who are migrating under whatever the circumstances they are having to move.
Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time. But thank you very much for presenting the new U.S. Arctic policy here. We hope that as the assemblies continue in the coming years, you will return and give us a report on how it's going. We will certainly examine the senators when they turn up at the next assembly, because you need the funding for this stuff. So thank you very much for this, but I think it is indicative of how our new Arctic policies are being offered, that now we have had the United States. Shortly we will have the new Arctic policy of India, but in between, our neighbors, the Faroe Islands, will present their new Arctic policy as well. And this variety in scope of new Arctic policy, from India to Washington to the Faroe Islands, is, I think, an indicator of the dynamic transformation that is taking place in this part of the world. So thank you very much. Let us introduce the Foreign Minister of the Faroe Islands and take questions from that. Thank you very much.